It's strange how something as ordinary as the walls around you, the same walls that make you feel safe, protected, and separated from the outside world, can suddenly become the very thing that makes you feel the most uneasy. Because walls aren't just barriers, they're spaces, hollow, quiet, and hidden. And most of the time, you don't think about what might exist inside them because you trust that there's nothing there. But sometimes, people start to hear things, sounds that don't belong, movements that don't make sense. And once you notice them, it becomes impossible to ignore. Tonight, I'm going to share three true stories from people who heard something inside their walls. Experiences that started with small, explainable noises and slowly turned into something far more disturbing. And these aren't just random creaks or harmless sounds. These are the kind of moments that make you question whether you're really alone in your own home. The first story comes from a man who had recently moved into an older apartment building, a place that looked completely normal during the day. Nothing unusual, just another quiet residential building with thin hallways and identical doors. The kind of place where you don't expect anything out of the ordinary. For the first few days, everything was fine. He unpacked his things, settled into a routine, and started getting used to the space. But then one night, as he was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, he heard something that caught his attention. A faint sound, coming from inside the wall next to his bed. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was just pipes, something common in older buildings. But the sound didn't go away. It wasn't random. It had a pattern, a soft, uneven tapping, not loud, not aggressive, just there. He sat up slightly, listening more carefully, trying to figure out exactly where it was coming from. And that's when he realized it wasn't just inside the wall. It was moving, slowly, from one side to the other. He frowned, still trying to stay rational, thinking maybe it was an animal, something stuck in the walls. But something about the movement didn't feel right. It wasn't quick or erratic like an animal would be. It was slow, deliberate, as if whatever was making that sound was aware of its surroundings. The tapping continued for a few minutes, then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. He lay back down, telling himself it was nothing, eventually falling asleep despite the uneasy feeling in his chest. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same place. The tapping returned, slightly louder this time, clearer, more noticeable, and once again, it moved along the wall, stopping near the same spot beside his bed. This time, he didn't ignore it. He got up, walked over, and placed his hand against the wall, holding it there, trying to feel any vibration, any movement. For a moment, there was nothing. And then, it happened. A faint knock. From the other side, his entire body froze. He pulled his hand away instantly, staring at the wall, his heart starting to race as his mind tried to process what had just happened. That wasn't random noise. That wasn't pipes. That was a response. He stood there for a few seconds, unsure of what to do, then slowly, almost without thinking, he knocked back, lightly, just once. The silence that followed felt endless. Then, another knock came from inside the wall, slightly louder, slightly faster. His breath caught in his throat. He stepped back, the realization hitting him that whatever was making that sound was reacting to him. He didn't knock again. He didn't speak. He just stood there, waiting. until eventually the sound stopped completely. That night, he barely slept. The next day, he tried to find a logical explanation, checking for vents, pipes, anything that could explain the noise. But everything looked normal. There was no obvious space where something could be moving like that. No signs of damage, nothing. He even asked a neighbor casually if they had ever heard anything strange, but they just shrugged it off, saying old buildings make noise. But the next night, it got worse. The tapping didn't just come once, it came repeatedly, faster, more insistent, and this time, it didn't stop at the wall. It moved upward, toward the ceiling. The sound shifted from beside his bed to directly above him, like something inside the structure was changing position, moving through spaces he couldn't see. He lay there, frozen, listening as the tapping continued above him. Then slowly, it stopped. Right above his head, the silence lasted only a second. Then, a single knock came from the ceiling, directly over him. His entire body went cold. Because this time, he hadn't responded. He hadn't made a sound. And yet, it knocked anyway, as if it knew exactly where he was. He didn't stay in that apartment much longer after that. He moved out within a week, not bothering to explain the real reason, but even now, what stays with him isn't just the sound itself. It's the way it changed, the way it adapted, the way it moved closer, like whatever was inside those walls was just making noise. It was learning where he was, learning how to reach him, and waiting for him to respond again. The second story comes from a family who had been living in their house for several years. A normal, suburban home where nothing unusual had ever really happened. The kind of place where every room felt familiar, every sound was recognizable, and nothing ever made them feel unsafe. Until one night, when something small started to change. It began with the youngest member of the family, a child who started complaining about hearing noises coming from the walls in his bedroom. At first, the parents didn't think much of it. They assumed it was just imagination. Maybe the house settling, maybe pipes, something normal that kids sometimes notice more than adults do. But the child insisted that it wasn't random. He said the sound only came at night and that it didn't just stay in one place. It moved. He described it as something crawling slowly inside the wall, stopping sometimes, then continuing again, like it was searching for something. The parents tried to reassure him, even checked the walls for any signs of pests or damage, but everything looked completely fine. No holes, no marks, nothing that would explain it. For a few nights, the complaints continued, always at the same time, always with the same description, until eventually something happened that made them take it more seriously. One night, the mother was awake late, sitting in the living room while the rest of the house was quiet, when she heard it for the first time herself. A faint sound, coming from the wall behind her. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was exactly what she had told her child, just pipes or the structure of the house. But then the sound became clearer. It wasn't random. It had a pattern. A slow, uneven tapping, followed by a brief pause, then another tap. Her body went still as she listened, her mind trying to make sense of it. And then she noticed something else. The sound wasn't staying in one place. It was moving, slowly, along the wall. She stood up, turning slightly, following the direction of the sound with her eyes, even though she couldn't see anything. It continued for a few seconds, then stopped suddenly. The silence felt heavier than it should have. She stood there for a moment, unsure of what she had just heard. But before she could think further, the sound came again, this time from a different wall, across the room. Her stomach tightened instantly. That didn't make sense. There was no direct connection between those walls that would allow something to move that quickly. She stepped closer, her heartbeat picking up, and just as she reached out her hand toward the surface, a soft knock came from the other side. She pulled her hand back immediately, a cold wave of unease rushing through her. That wasn't random. That wasn't structure noise. That was something reacting. The next morning, she told her husband about it. And for the first time, the situation felt real enough that they both decided to pay closer attention. That night, they stayed awake longer than usual, sitting quietly, waiting, listening. For a while, nothing happened. The house remained still, silent, almost normal. But then, around the same time the child had mentioned before, the sound returned. This time, both of them heard it clearly. A slow tapping, moving inside the walls. They didn't speak. They didn't react at first. They just listened, their eyes fixed on the surface as the sound traveled from one section of the room to another, stopping briefly at certain points, then continuing again. And then, something changed. The tapping stopped. Completely, the silence stretched for a few seconds. And then a single knock came from the wall directly in front of them. Both of them froze. Before either of them could react, another knock followed. Then another. Each one slightly faster than the last. Not loud, not aggressive, but intentional, like something was trying to get their attention. The husband slowly stepped forward, his expression tense, and without fully thinking about it, he knocked back, just once. The reaction was immediate. 3 knocks came back. Faster, more precise. His breath caught in his throat as he stepped back, the realization hitting both of them at the same time. This wasn't random noise. This wasn't an animal. This was something responding. Neither of them spoke after that. They simply stood there, listening, as the knocking slowly stopped, replaced once again by silence. Over the next few days, things only got worse. The sounds didn't stay confined to one room anymore. They moved through the house, from the living room walls to the hallway, from the hallway to the ceiling, and sometimes faintly, even from beneath the floor. Always at night, always moving, always stopping, just long enough to be noticed. But the most disturbing part came a few nights later. The child woke up screaming. When the parents rushed into the room, they found him sitting up in bed, pointing at the wall beside him, his face pale with fear. He kept saying the same thing over and over, that the sound wasn't just in the wall anymore. It had moved closer. The parents tried to calm him down, telling him it was just a bad dream. But then, they heard it too, a faint tapping. Not inside the wall this time, not behind it, but directly on the surface, right where the child was pointing. The 3 of them stood there in silence, staring at the wall as the tapping continued slowly, deliberately, each knock spaced out just enough to feel intentional. And then, it stopped. No movement, no sound, nothing. As if whatever had been there had simply decided to stop. They didn't stay in that house much longer after that. They moved within a few weeks, leaving most of their explanations behind. But even now, what unsettles them the most isn't just the sound itself. It's the way it changed, The way it moved, the way it adapted, going from inside the walls to directly on them, as if whatever was there wasn't just making noise. It was getting closer, learning the layout of the house, learning where they were, and slowly finding its way out. The third story comes from a man who lived alone in a small rented house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, a place that felt normal during the day. Nothing unusual, just another simple home with thin walls and narrow rooms. The kind of place where you wouldn't expect anything out of the ordinary. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. He followed his routine, went to work, came back, and spent his evenings in silence, enjoying the quiet that came with living alone. But then one night, something small changed. As he was lying in bed, half asleep, he heard a faint sound coming from inside the wall near his head. At first he ignored it, assuming it was just pipes or the house settling, something natural. But the sound didn't go away. It repeated. A soft, uneven tapping, followed by short pauses, like something lightly knocking from the other side. He opened his eyes, staring into the darkness, listening more carefully. And that's when he noticed something that made him uneasy. The pattern wasn't random. It had a rhythm, not fast, not aggressive, just slow and consistent. He sat up slightly, focusing on the wall, trying to figure out where exactly it was coming from. And after a few seconds, the tapping stopped. The silence felt heavier than it should have. He waited, expecting it to start again, but nothing happened. And eventually he convinced himself it was nothing and went back to sleep. The next night it happened again. Same time, same place. But this time, it lasted longer. The tapping continued for several minutes, moving slightly along the wall, stopping occasionally before starting again. A quiet sense of unease settled in his chest, but he still tried to ignore it, telling himself it had to be something normal. Over the next few nights, the sound became more frequent, more noticeable, and slowly, it started to change. It didn't just stay in one area anymore. It moved. From the wall beside his bed, to the corner of the room, to the ceiling, as if something inside the structure was shifting position, moving through spaces he couldn't see. The thought crossed his mind that it might be an animal trapped inside, but something about the movement didn't feel right. It was too controlled, too precise, like it wasn't random at all. Then one night, everything escalated. He woke up to the sound again, louder this time, clearer, more defined. The tapping came rapidly for a few seconds, then stopped abruptly. He sat up, his heart already starting to race. And just as he focused on the wall, he heard it. A knock, single, direct, from the other side. His entire body froze. That wasn't random noise. That wasn't pipes. That was deliberate. He stared at the wall, his breathing shallow, his mind trying to process what was happening. And then, without fully thinking about it, he knocked back, lightly. Just once. The reaction was immediate. 3 knocks came back. Fast, precise. His stomach dropped. A cold wave of fear rushed through him as he slowly pulled his hand away. The realization hitting him that whatever was inside the wall had responded. He didn't knock again. He didn't speak. He just sat there, frozen, listening, until the sound stopped completely. The next day he decided to do something about it. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He called the landlord and explained that he thought there might be something inside the walls. Maybe an animal, maybe a structural issue, anything that could explain the noise. The landlord agreed to send someone to check it. Later that afternoon, a maintenance worker arrived, and together they started inspecting the area where the sound had been coming from. They checked for openings, damage, anything unusual, but everything seemed normal. Still, to be sure, the worker decided to open a small section of the wall. The sound of the tool cutting into the surface filled the room, breaking through the quiet, and as the panel came loose, both of them leaned in slightly, expecting to see some kind of explanation. Wires, pipes, maybe a trapped animal, but there was nothing. Just empty space between the walls. No marks, no movement, nothing at all. The worker shrugged, saying it was probably just the house settling, something common in older structures, and eventually left. That should have been the end of it. But that night, the sound came back, louder than ever, faster, more aggressive. It didn't move slowly anymore. It rushed through the walls, from one side of the room to the other, then up to the ceiling, then down again, as if whatever had been inside had been disturbed. His heart pounded as he sat there, frozen, listening as the tapping turned into something more intense, more erratic, until suddenly it stopped. Completely. The silence that followed was overwhelming. And then, from the exact spot where the wall had been opened earlier, there was a knock, not inside, not behind on the surface, right in front of him. His entire body went cold. Because that space had been empty. There was nothing inside it. And yet, something was knocking from there. He didn't stay in that house after that night. He left the next morning, not even bothering to pack everything, just taking what he needed and getting out as quickly as possible. But even now, what stays with him isn't just the sound itself. It's what it means. Because whatever was inside those walls wasn't just something hiding in the structure. It was something that didn't need space at all. Something that could exist where there should have been nothing. Something that wasn't just behind the walls, but somehow still there, even when there was nowhere left to hide. And the most disturbing thing about these stories isn't just the sounds themselves. It's what those sounds represent. Because in every single case, the people didn't start off afraid. They heard something small, something explainable, something easy to ignore at first, just a faint tapping, a slight movement, a noise that could be blamed on anything. Until it wasn't. Until it repeated. Until it followed a pattern. Until it started reacting. And that's the part that's hardest to ignore. Because random sounds don't respond. They don't change based on what you do. They don't move with intention. And they definitely don't get closer over time. But in all of these stories, something did. Something inside the walls didn't just exist quietly. It noticed, it adapted, it waited. And in some cases, it answered back. And maybe that's what makes this kind of fear different from anything else. Because walls are supposed to protect you. They're supposed to separate you from the outside world, to keep things out, to make you feel safe. And when something breaks that idea, when something comes from within those walls instead of outside them, it changes the way you think about every sound you hear after that. Because think about it. Right now, wherever you are, there are walls around you. Solid, still, quiet, but inside them, there are spaces you can't see, areas you don't think about, places that exist just out of reach of your awareness. And most of the time, there's nothing there, just empty structure, just silence. But what if that silence isn't always empty? What if sometimes something else is there too? Not loud enough to be obvious, not clear enough to be understood, just present enough to be noticed, if you're paying attention. And maybe that's why these stories stay with people, not because of what they heard in that moment, but briefly, but because of what it suggests afterward, that the place you feel safest in might not be as empty as you think, that the quiet around you might not just be silence, it might be something choosing not to make a sound. So the next time you're alone at night, lying in your room, surrounded by walls that feel completely still, and you hear something small, something faint, something that doesn't quite make sense, don't ignore it too quickly, because sometimes the most unsettling sounds aren't the ones that come from outside. They're the ones that come from right beside you, from a place you can't see, but that might be closer than you think.